Hello, we are here in Loomuse Academy, and today we are talking about insects and plans, what people have to farm insects. And here with me is Francis from Eurogroup for Animals. Hello.
Hello, Faristamo. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining and for this discussion we will have now. But before we begin, please tell us a few words about yourself and how did you end up working with insects?
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, my name is Francis Maugère. I'm a political advisor at Eurogroup for Animals, which is the Pan-European Federation for Animal Protection. It has over 100 members all across Europe and even beyond Europe. My job here is related to farm animals advocacy in Brussels, and more precisely to insect farming in the European Union, which is quite of an unknown topic. But at Eurogroup for Animals, we are quite concerned with this new form of farming that implies the rearing of trillions of new animals. And I ended up working here because I always wanted to work in farm animal advocacy. And to be honest, I was always passionate and impressed by insects. So this is a subject that is quite dear to my heart. So I've always wanted to work with animals, and I'm also a photographer. So I've photographed insects for 2, 3, 5 years maybe. So this is very interesting to me, but this also connects to bigger concerns around animal welfare and food policy.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, especially this photography part. So the first thing, insects and animal welfare. Is it possible at all to have these insect farms so that insects would be happy there?
It's a really good question. The first question that comes before that, usually when I talk with people, is, but do insects really suffer, or do insects really matter? Do we have to consider them? And it's quite an interesting question because we advance in uncharted territory mostly. And what we have to keep in mind most of the time is the human ability over history to dismiss the capacity of other animals to suffer. We had that for a long time with many mammals, then with fishes, with birds, now with invertebrates. And slowly we are accepting the fact that some invertebrates, maybe all invertebrates, are able to feel, to have pleasant or negative experience, to have a sentient life in the end. This is very interesting. There is a growing body of evidence that has come up in the recent years, and that points toward the direction of insects being likely or very likely to suffer to have a sentient life. And of course, this begs the question, in the insect farms that we see blooming across the continent, are there welfare issues? Because we are talking about farms that may have thousands, hundreds of thousands of animals inside of them. So we are talking about massive numbers, and potentially all of these insects could well suffer. So we are talking about potentially not a moral tragedy, but something that we have to be concerned about, especially as no welfare protection actually exists for these animals. No legislation covers them, and most of the time farmed insects are not even considered farm animals, so they are completely excluded from all kinds of welfare protection.
Mm-hmm. And what I have heard usually is that insect farming is environmentally friendly or friendlier, and that's why it's needed to do, because red meat and all that things. So what about insects and their environmental impact?
That's a very interesting story, actually. Something that has to take us back approximately 20 years ago, when insect farming was really beginning. You had the first startups, at least in Europe, trying to see whether or not they were going to farm insects. And the belief started with some studies that showed promising comparisons of insect proteins compared to beef and how to replace meat in human diets with the insect. And allegedly, in these first studies that were quite incomplete and often not done in Europe even, insect protein was shown to be much better than beef in that most form of meat. So in an optic of replacing the kind of food that hurt the animals and hurt the planet and even hurt our diets and our health, that made some sense. The problem is, over time, and this became critical in the 2010s, insect farming started to grow not as a replacement of beef, of meat, and food that are hurting the planet and the animals, but rather as a feed industry. And all of these startups quickly understood that they were not being able to sell insect as a meat replacement. When they were able to sell insect as human food, it was not as a meat replacement, it was maybe as pastas or as other types of food that were not really attractive. And their biggest market was actually animal feed, turning insects into feed for farmed fishes, for pigs, for poultry. And this is what we observed at Eurogroup for Animals, which is that the main investors, the main financiers, identified that feed is the main market for insect protein. And when you look at the money that was raised to build these huge farms that we now have in Europe, it's about 20 times more money that were sent into insect farms to produce in the feed for farmed animals rather than farms that were to produce human food. And the thing is, the narrative about insect protein being this revolutionary food that was going to change our food systems, this narrative stayed and stuck. And when you hear about insect farming in the media, it always starts with that, with insect farming is going to revolutionize the way we eat, it's going to replace meat, it's going to replace beef and that. And when you look really into the numbers, this is not going to happen. What is going to happen is actually insect is turning into a provider of feed, mostly for factory farming. And these brand shiny comparisons that were put forward in the beginning to compare insects to meat, insects to pig meat or to poultry meat, well, actually what we need to do is compare insects with conventional feed. And when we do that, when we compare insects with, say, maize, soybean, or fish meal, the picture is not that bright. Insect farming, the greenhouse gases emission, the environmental impact of insect production is closer to chicken farming. And to have insects that are more sustainable than soybean or more sustainable than fish meal, you would have to be in extremely efficient production system. That's what the most complete and recent study found. And this very efficient production system, these are systems where all of the energy, because insect farming is very energy intensive, all the energy comes from renewables. Insects are fed with only food waste that could not be given to any other animals or could not be used instead. And these extremely efficient systems are never what is happening in reality. The biggest producers, most of them use conventional crops to feed insects. Most of them have very high energy costs. And in the end, insect as feed turns out to be much worse than what it seeks to replace. And it has much higher environmental impacts than conventional feed.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, my next question would have been like, can insects be part of a sustainable food system? And you almost answered it that the answer is no. So do you have something to add to it?
Yeah, it's really one of our biggest concerns about insect farming. That it still has this image of a revolutionary food, something that will completely change our plate and what we eat and help us towards sustainable food systems. And when people are talking about insect farming, most of the time insect protein is bundled up with other alternative proteins, such as plant-based food, cultivated meat, algae, and stuff like that. While, as we have discussed, in reality, insect farming is about feed production. So insect farming is basically propping up factory farming as we know it, and the disastrous consequences it has on the animals, on the planet, on our health. And this is a big concern because despite that, insect farming still has this very environmentally friendly, tech-friendly image, and the risk that this is posing for sustainable food system development is that instead of having a real change and getting out of factory farming toward alternatives, toward more plant-based food, toward healthier diets, we actually have more of the same, but greenwashed by insect farming, who will be providing cheaper yet no greener feed to factory farming. So this is a big problem, and this actually risks cancelling any benefits we could have from sustainable food systems in the future.
Mm-hmm. But why then this insect farming still is somehow going on if there are so many obstacles and bad things behind it?
You're right. There are many obstacles surrounding the sector. Most of them come from the costs of insect production. It's very energy intensive. It's very costly to actually produce insects. And that's why many of the producers are also struggling, even though there are so many that one of them is doomed to find a good business model at the time. It is still booming because they have done a really good job at selling insect farming. And the narrative that's around this industry is always very positive. You see it in the media, and since 10 years, since 2013, they have an incredibly good coverage. This all stems from a FAO report that was published in 2013 that was very positive toward insect farming. And after that, there were surges in investments. Even in 2021 or 2022, you had huge investments in this industry, even though they are not currently making any profit, but they are still able to expand and to provide greenwashed feed to factory farming. So the industry is struggling, but the industry is also trying to find new ways of lowering the costs and actually have insect farming be profitable for them. Not having insect farming be any greener or stuff like that, but to work economically. This is a bit concerning because the main way they are doing that is through two ways. One of them is genetic selection or manipulation of insects, which entails some risks for insect welfare, but also for nearby environments in case of accidental release, and also through the offshoring of insect protein production from Europe towards better geographies, such as Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm. Food security is something what we hear a lot about because of climate change, drought, a lot of rain, all these things. Is this also something they use to talk good about their industry?
Exactly. It's kind of a new talking point from insect producers because, as I discussed before, the sustainability effect of insect farming and how good sustainability it is slowly but surely being tackled and debunked. We see also articles coming and studies that show times and time again that actually no, insect farming is not that green, it's not that sustainable, it's not that circular. And the new talking point from insect producers or insect representatives is, oh, but actually insect farming is all about providing food security and allowing Europe, the European Union, and all of its members to reduce their dependency on imported soy or on fish meal and actually replace that with insect protein. The problem is that these insect producers are using conventional feed. So we have kind of a food feed competition going on here. because insect producers are actually not able to feed insects with food waste and being able to be competitive, to be able to provide healthy and reliable feed when they do that. So they rely on high quality grains, on cereals, on legumes to feed their insects. So instead of cultivating crops and giving them to humans, or instead of cultivating crops and giving them to animals and then to humans, we are adding another level, another stratific level that is both inefficient and that is costly for society. Mm-hmm. So this whole food security argument is kind of debunked by that, by this over-reliance of the industry on conventional feed.
Mm. So if till now there was this kind of narrative that the farmed animals will get crops and soy and they eat it, and then meat goes to people. So this is kind of narrative what wastes food. Then there will be now another another part what makes this food waste even bigger.
Exactly, and this and hence the competition of crops for food or feed use. We already know that this competition is very high, and part of EU's food security challenges actually come from that, from the fact that we need so much feed to go into factory farming or into some form of farming in Europe, but we will have another traffic level, another way to use even more conventional feed. So it's not really a food security gain here. It's worsening things more than anything.
Mm-hmm. But what about biosecurity threats? Are there some?
It's an interesting topic as well, and something that could be evident when you think about it. We are talking about insect farms, small farms in terms of land, kind of these big plants in which you can have hundreds of thousands or even millions of individuals that are packed at very high densities. And insects are typically the type of animals that are ready to escape at first notice. So this is not surprising that biosecurity risks exist, because if one day there is an accidental release, we could end up with a large population of insects going out in the wild. This is exacerbated by the fact that many of the species that are found in insect farms, most of them are non-native to Europe, or native only to certain parts of Europe. This is, for example, the case of the black soda fly, which is the most farmed species in Europe. And on top of that, as I was saying before, the industry in its path to profitability is looking at genetic selection and manipulation of insects. So we are talking about ways to impact the genome of these flies, for example, to have them grow bigger and faster, or use less food to grow bigger. And if unleashed in any bioenvironment, these large population of insects could establish and have tremendous impact on the environment, but not only on our environment, also on food security. And this issue is more and more pressing, as some studies have already noted that there has been impact of genetic manipulation on wild population of insects. This has already happened and been recorded in studies. So this is very concerning, and it also impacts other concerns that we have, for example, on insect welfare, because some of the genetic manipulation of insects will also impact wild traits of insects and impact them in their feeding habits or in their living conditions, on the way they breed or anything like that. So this is also a concern that we have on the welfare side.
That what you just told sounds absolutely horrible, because very many people are afraid of insects. And then you have like this big barn of insects. Like how does it work, or how people are doing that? I don't know if you know or can answer to that question, but when you explained it, that yes, of course there can be these accidents and this climate change, it brings more and more these hurricanes, and with farmed animals, if there is a lot of water, usually people are somehow taken away from those places, but the animals are left there. And what happens then with insects?
It's very difficult to know, and obviously this has not happened as mass scale as we know it, but it's also difficult to know precisely what happened inside the insect farms. We have to understand that this is a new sector, a new niche economic sector on which the competitors are, well, let's say competitors, they are startups, and everybody is trying to develop the best business model to be profitable and to be able to replace feed, replace fish meal, something like that. So every one of these industries is kind of very secretive. So it's very difficult to really know what happens inside. If you want to visit a farm with something like that, it's very difficult. And the image that the industry is trying to show is one of a very clean or organized industry. This is actually quite interesting because most of the time when we talk about farm animal agriculture, the publicity, the image that most of the producers want to show is an image of nature and animals living their best life outside, even though most of the time it's not the case. With insects, it's quite the opposite. The industry is trying to showcase insect farms as being these kind of laboratories where everything is clean, everything is untouched by human hands, it's all machines, it's all perfectly sealed boxes and stuff like that. From the echoes that we have of people that have actually visited farms, it's much more messy than that, and it's really understandable. We are talking about having millions of insects in a very packed space, having sometimes agricultural byproducts that come from different seasons, from different productions, so it's difficult to have a very streamlined and coherent production of insects. From the echo that we have from some people that live nearby these farms, it also stinks, which says nothing of the environmental or welfare value of these farms, but can give you an image of how messy this can be inside.
I can understand why they want to say that this is all done by machines and people haven't touched it, because to imagine there's millions of insects in a somewhere, it is kind of horrifying. But yeah, okay, let's move on. Can you explain a little bit insects and this circularity topic?
Yeah, so this also stems from the original narrative that this sector has been able to sell, and that was conveyed by the initial studies, the initial papers on insect farming, that insect farming is very sustainable, but also insect farming should be circular. And this idea of circularity is illustrated through different things. The first one is that to be circular, insect farming could use food waste, so kitchen waste or other types of food waste that are discarded today, and use them to feed the insects, because some of these insects, not all of them, but have the potential to turn part of this food waste into edible proteins. And actually, this image is much more difficult and much more complicated than this kind of shiny and circular brand. Because when you look into it, to harness food waste, you have to find supplies of food waste that are cheap, that are accessible, that are reliable all year long if you want to have coherent protein production. They have to be healthy, that's kind of the main issue. They have to be not bad for the insects, because we have seen examples of crickets with mortality rates of over 99% when reared on kitchen waste, because it's just not good for them. So you have a lot of challenges that come with the fact of harnessing food waste for insect protein production. And in the end, insect producers are not doing that because it's not profitable for them. They are not able to live out of them. What is useful for them is not to use food waste, it's to use conventional crops. And it's kind of logical because if you want to rear black butterflies or crickets on food waste, it's difficult, it's messy, it's long. The insect will have to be there for a much longer time than if you use soy or fruits or even maize byproducts or something like that, something that could be used directly for farm animals, but that is diverted for insect production because it's what they need for insect production. So this whole circularity argument, it works on paper, it works in lab setting, but the second you want to do that at scale, the second you want to do that in plants that are able to deliver insect meal, insect feed, it's not working at all. So that's why most of the players in the industry are not doing that. And there is another element of the whole circularity claim of the industry, which is to reuse insect frass as a fertilizer. Now, insect frass is this substance that is made of a lot of different things. It's part of what they were given to feed the insects that stays here. It has also dead insects and body parts inside and excrements and stuff like that. It's a bit of everything. It's like manure, but more gross. And theoretically, it could be used as a fertilizer. But actually, the science on this is very unclear. And we have also been seeing examples of insect frass still conveying pathogens that were in insects or that were in insect food and ended up in the frass. And then when it was used on plants to grow plants, it was actually detrimental to the growth of these plants. So this whole circularity claim from the industry of insect farming production, which stems from using food waste and reusing insect frass, it's a bit dubious, and we do not know exactly if this is really working, and this is not actually what the industry is even doing. So this is another example of the industry trying to present itself as very sustainable and having a very good impact on the planet, while in reality, what they are looking for is, well, profitability, and this is circularity is not a priority when you want to be profitable.
Mm-hmm. You explained before that it's quite difficult to get inside the insect farms to be able to see what's happening there. Are the documents and this kind of material freely accessible? Like you explained that the industry is not doing this food circulation, basically. Is it very easy to find that kind of information?
It's actually very difficult because most of these producers are not disclosing their numbers. There are some of them are presenting life cycle assessment of insect production, but not necessarily giving the numbers on what kind of food they use for the insects or what is the overall environmental impact and stuff like that. What we know, we actually know it from retired insect producers that give their testimony about how it was done, but also from some of the studies that were done on insect farms to compare different types of food for insects. They were actually hard to say, oh, this diet is better than this. And it showed that most of the big players, most of the big startups in insect farming, they were not comparing food waste with another type of food waste. They were comparing soy with maize or soy with another type of feed because that's what's interesting for them. And they need to see which one of these conventional feed is more useful for them to grow their insects. But overall, I agree, it's very difficult to have reliable and precise information about what's happening. One of our sources, however, is the IPIF, which is the International Platform of Insects for Food and Feed, which is the body of representatives of insect producers in Europe. And they did a survey about some years ago, actually asking producers, what do you use to feed your insects? Do you use food waste? Do you use agricultural byproducts? Do you use legumes, crops, and stuff like that? And 3/4 of the producers used fruits and vegetables. I don't remember exactly for the other numbers, but about 2/3 of them use conventional crops like soy, like maize. So we also have indication from the industry itself that what they are doing is not circular. They are not using food waste because it's not working for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is very interesting that somehow this law system has developed so that society is agreeing with this type of food production when it's not allowed to go inside and to see, or at least maybe not everyone should go inside, of course, but that this kind of reports would be open, and that maybe some cameras would be inside so that people would really know what happens inside these factories, especially because these are also living beings out there. It's not like you have some kind of chairs and you don't want anyone to see how you created this kind of chair.
Exactly. That's also why we are asking, Eurogroup is asking the European Union to have more standards and more rules when it comes to biosecurity checks, health checks, welfare checks for these farms, because we need to make sure that this industry does not evolve into a threat, into something that poses risks for animals, risks for the environment, risks for even human health and animal health if this is used in human or animal diets. But what we're experiencing is a bit of a difficulty, because most governments, also in the European Unions, have a challenge when considering insect farming. It's never considered as what it is. It's always, oh, we are going to look into insect farming from the organic certification lens, or we are going to look into insect farming from these specific health risks, or we are looking into how we can expand into another species, stuff like that. But we never have a really comprehensive debate about what is this industry and what is it adding or not into sustainable food systems, or what is this industry when it relates to animal welfare? Is it should we connect it to other welfare law and stuff like that? So we are also calling for policymakers at state level, even in the European Union, to grasp this issue and to actually research it, and to go beyond year reports that are completely outdated from 10 years ago, but actually look into the truth of this industry and what is this industry, what has it done compared to what it promised to be done, and how should it fit or not into future food systems in the EU.
Mm-hmm. And what I hear is that maybe there should also be a question or the possibility that maybe that wasn't a good idea at all. Maybe we should stop it after trying it out and seeing how it goes.
I think that at least we should abide by a precautionary approach when it comes to insect farming. Because as we have seen it, we are 20 years into the development of this industry, and we still have no confirmation of its environmental benefits. We still have no clear perspective on the welfare needs and on what needs to be done for all these animals. And it's something that is recognized even by the Commission's own experts when they did a study 2 years ago, that there is an overwhelming lack of knowledge about all aspects of this industry, including sustainability, including circularity, including welfare, including all of these aspects. And it is as if the industry is allowed to develop unchecked and with little to no rules, like they are lifting the rules when it comes to insect farming so that it's easier for them to access new markets. It's completely unchecked, even though we have reasons to believe that this can entail risks. There are many concerns about this, and we need to have a real debate about what is this industry, because we cannot allow it to just develop for the sake of developing over promises that were done 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. My questions are almost now asked. The last one is about your recommendations, or what do you think, like personally, what should we do or people do with that topic?
It's interesting. We have a certain number of asks when it comes to insect farming. The first one is actually to connect it to sustainable food system and other things, to rethink that, and to have policymakers that actually think about what needs to be done to achieve sustainable food system and what is the general direction. Because if it is giving money and lifting regulation so that unclear solution can prop up factory farming, this is obviously not the solution. And we also have concerns when it comes to what kind of standards should be put out, what kind of welfare research should be done. But I guess in my view, one of the most interesting parts of this industry is actually thinking about what it means for us to adding more animals into the food chain. Is this really what we want to do? Do we really want to add to the billions of animals that are already found and the trillions of fishes that are already fished? Do we want to add another trillion or trillions? Like industry numbers could suggest that by 2030 we have 50 trillion insects found every year. Like, do we really want to have that many animals in the food chain without first really looking into their welfare needs, their sentience, if they need our consideration? I think this is the biggest leap forward, even something that can be done at an individual scale when looking at insects themselves, because we are not used to care about insects, but we could definitely try. And yeah, the rest is also looking at the environment or health, sustainable food systems. And yeah, this all connects to what kind of food system we want to have in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. This is really something what is considered quite rarely, this being careful. Like maybe sometimes it's better to be careful and not to do some things, and this insect farming really sounds like one of those topics. Anyways, thank you, Francis, for discussing this topic. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will have a written Estonian version of this interview also. So for those for whom this was maybe a little bit difficult listening, you can read about it in Estonian soon enough. Thank you, and see you next time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.